our spirit and our souls, is the word of God. And this is what gets us from day to day through our journey as we pilgrim along the way in this world. And I thank God for the lesson that God allowed us to start with on last week. This lesson speaks volumes to us as to trust in God in every phase, in every step of our lives. And again, I said tonight that this is a passage that I loved over the years because it talks about trusting God in every instance, and especially in extreme circumstances in our lives. Learning how to trust God in every instance and extreme circumstance in our life. Every step of the way, trust God. And I wanted to go back to the thought from last week, and we continue with this lesson. If God be for us, who is it that can be against us? And if they are, what does it really matter? If God be for us, who is it that can be against us? And if they are, what does it really matter? And getting back, if you will, to the lesson from on last week, we know that, let me just give a quick overview from chapter 1, leading us up to chapter 2 tonight. But we know some circumstances and things that had happened in the beginning of the book of Daniel. And we know that Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had besieged Jerusalem at this time, the holy city of Judah, and had taken away certain children. He took away those who were cunning in knowledge, who was very knowledgeable, skillful in wisdom. And then those that was well favored and gifted in learning. He took the best of the stock of Israel, the children with the brightest mind, and carried them back to Babylon to teach them the Chaldean ways. And we asked ourselves the question, why would he take young children that were skilled and cunning in knowledge and well gifted in learning? Why would he take this group and take them back to Babylon? The reason was that he wanted to teach them the Babylonian ways. And he wanted to take the best of God's stock and use it for his own dwelling and his own purpose. And when we know that Nebuchadnezzar didn't mean them any good, he was just going to take what he wanted, the best from God, and use it not in a godly way, but in a unholy way. And we'll see that in the lesson tonight as we come up on it. And to get them to do devilish deeds. And as I was looking at this, I'm still of the opinion, and I'm glad that that it stood out here in the text. In the midst of their bondage, and in the midst of the chaos that they was going through, they still chose to serve God. And can I put a pin here tonight, starting off? In the midst of what Israel was going on, in the midst of God's people, whatever what was going on, they still chose those who were carried off into bondage. They still chose to serve the El Shaddai, the Almighty God. And somebody online tonight have chose to worship God in the midst of your storm, in the midst of what you got going on in your life right now. You had to make a conscious decision as to who you was going to serve. I believe the word said, if God be God, then serve God. But if Baal be your God, then serve Baal. We're going to look at the difference in between the two tonight. Because, see, man has a way and a need to have faith in something, to choose as to which direction he's going to go in. And here these young children, that had been taken away from their homeland, taken away from the worship practices that they knew and had learned, and now are being taught the ways of another nation, a nation that is not godly, but that serve out of God, a heathen nation. And it was on purpose that they came to get the best of God's stock, to take it back and use them as their bidding. And as I was looking at that, I went on back again, and because I want to look at last week, there was 4 things that we talked about before we went off air. And I want to pick back up from where we left off on last week. We learned that through trust, we learned that through obedience, through faith, and also having patience, that God is a deliverer. And can I say that again tonight? We learn in our lives as we travel with God that there's some things that we have to hold on to get us from one point in our life to another. And these things that these young men held on to, these young children held on to, was trust, continual obedience in God, having faith in the Lord that God can and God will. And then they learn how to be patient. They learn how to wait on God until God decided to come in. They didn't give up. They didn't throw the towel in, but they waited on God until God decided it was time for him to step in. I was looking at the lesson. Let's go back to chapter 2, if you will. I want to start at chapter 2, verse 24. And allow me to begin to read this because Daniel interprets the dream. God had given Nebuchadnezzar a dream when he went to sleep on his bed. And God gave him a vision, but he didn't understand what the vision was. And nobody in his realm could interpret the dream. He called in all his wise men and asked them, the wise men of Babylon, and asked them, could they interpret the dream? And none of them could tell him what the dream meant. And we know the story how it went on last week, that he was getting ready to kill all of his wise men because they could not interpret the dream. But when Daniel heard what was going on, Daniel asked to enter the room. And when Daniel came in and he entered the room and he spoke up and said, I will be able to interpret the dream. Let's go to Daniel chapter 2 and verse 24, if you will. It said, therefore Daniel went in unto Arioch, whom the king had ordained to destroy the wise men of Babylon. Since none of the wise men could interpret the dream, the king said, I'm going to destroy every wise man I got. But when Daniel got wind of what was going on, Daniel entered into the room. And he went in and said thus unto him, destroy not the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king, and I will show the king the interpretation thereof. Why did Daniel say, destroy not the wise men of Babylon? They wasn't Daniel's friend. But Daniel knew that even if these young men wasn't their friend, they had limited ability to be able to interpret this dream that came from God. And Daniel knew that because he knew God and God knew him, that God would give him the interpretation of the dream. And can I just stop here tonight? Because see, it's according to the relationship that we have with God, that we step out and we step forward with God. Daniel wasn't afraid of his belief. He wasn't afraid of what he knew that his God could do. And he spoke to the enemy what he knew his God could do. And that's what I want to stop here tonight and just say, we got not to be so timid in our belief in God. We got to speak like and act like we know that God can and God will. That's the territory that Daniel was moving and navigating in. And look what happened here in chapter 2. Let's go back down to verse 24, if you will. And therefore Daniel went in unto Arioch, whom the king had ordained to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus unto him, destroy not the wise men of Babylon, bring me in before the king, and I will show unto the king the interpretation. That's when you know that you got a relationship with God. God hadn't gave it to Daniel yet, but Daniel said, I trust my God. You see, sometimes we know that God is God and he's able. We'll step out even before we see it happen. We'll walk in what we believe that God is going to do. And Daniel was ready to walk in what he believed. Hadn't seen it yet. God hadn't gave him an interpretation, but Daniel believed that if he asked God, God would give it to him. And then in verse 25, it says, then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste. He rushed him in and said thus unto him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah. I got a little boy here. I got a captive of Judah who says that he can interpret the dream. Look at verse 25 again. I have found a man of the captives of Judah that will make known unto the king the interpretation thereof. And the king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, art thou able to make known unto me the dream which I have seen, and the interpretation thereof? And then look what Daniel said. Daniel answered in the presence of all, Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king had demanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers, the musicians, and the soothsayers show unto the king. He said, King, the dream that God gave you, these earthly men, these astrologers, those who are signs and what have you, cannot tell you what that is spiritual. And he's letting them know that, men can be smart of all the craftiness and the things of this world. They know what time the sun rise and what time the moon come up, the sun set and the moon come out at night. But they cannot interpret spiritual things. You got to have a relationship with God to be able to get the interpretation thereof. And then in verse 28, he said, but there is a God. Look what Daniel said. He said, the folk that you got that's so smart, they can't interpret this thing because this thing is of God. But then Daniel said in verse 28, Daniel said, there is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets and make it known unto the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Thou dream in thou vision, thou head upon thou bed are these. And he's letting the king know, he says that when you were sleeping, this is what God had told you. Let's go on down to verse 28 again. I'm gonna read it from another translation. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets and has told you in your dream what will happen in the future. This was your dream. In verse 29, you dreamed of coming events. He said, you dreamed about things that's getting ready to happen. He who reveals secrets was speaking to you. He said, the God of heaven was speaking to you while you were sleeping, dreaming. But remember, it is not because I am wiser than any living person that I know the secret of your dream. But God showed it to me for your behalf, for your benefit. Daniel said, I'm not anyone special, but God is using me to tell you, and it's going to be for your benefit if you listen to the dream. And I hate to go ahead and jump this fast forward tonight, but we know that Nebuchadnezzar did not listen as good as he should have listened. And we're going to find that out in a minute. Let's go down, if you will, to verse 30. Come with me to verse 30. But as for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have. He said, I'm not smart, more than any living, but for their sake, they shall make known the interpretation to the king, and that thou mayest know that thou know the thoughts of thine heart. Thou, O king, sawest and behold a great image. Watch this tonight. Look what he's getting ready to tell the king. He said, O king, you saw a huge and powerful statue of a man, shining brilliantly, uh, uh, frittering and trembling. The head of the statue was made of purest gold. Its chest and his arms were of silver. Daniel is giving him not only the dimensions, but he's giving him the wherewith and the worth of the material that it was made out of. The head of the statue was made out of the purest gold. Its chest and his arms were of silver. Its belly and its thighs was of brass. Its legs of iron. Its feet part iron and part clay. But as you watch, a rock was cut from the mountain by the supernatural, by supernatural means, Daniel said. It came hurling toward the statue and crushed the feet of the iron and clay, smashing them to bits. Now, Daniel is telling the king, he's telling him a story as to what happened in the dream. And Daniel is playing back what the king dreamed. Daniel is telling him the exact same thing that the king seen in his dream. Now Daniel is telling him, this is what you've seen. Let me go back to verse 32 again. It said the head of the statue was made of purest gold. Its chest and his arms was of silver. Its belly and its thighs of brass. Its legs of iron. Its feet part iron and part clay. But as you watch, he said, King, as you watch, a rock was cut from the mountainside by supernatural means. It came hurling toward the statue and crushed the feet of the iron and the clay, smashing them to bits. Then the whole statue collapsed into the heap of iron, clay, brass, silver, gold. Its pieces was crushed as small as chaff, and the wind blew them all away. But the rock that knocked the statue down became a great mountain that covered the whole earth. I got to put a breath there for a minute. Daniel described the king. He's telling the king's story just like he's seen it in the dream. But the king didn't understand what it meant. And then look what Daniel said. He said, now let me give you the interpretation. Let me give you the meaning of the dream while you were laying on the bed. And God troubled you with in the middle of the night. He said, this is the dream. This is the interpretation thereof that God is saying to you. Look at verse 36. It said, that was the dream. Now for its meaning. Your Majesty, you are a king over many kings. For the God of heaven has given you your kingdom. Listen closely what Daniel is telling him. You didn't get it yourself. The God of heaven had given you your kingdom. For the God of heaven has given you your kingdom, your power. He has given you your strength and your glory. Ain't none of this that you have, you got on your own. And can I just put a pin here tonight too? Because see, a lot of time when we see those that's in the world prospering and going on and doing this and seem like, they just having it good all the time, they can't get anything unless God allow it to come into their lives. But just because they're prospering now, don't mean that God don't have a plan. And Daniel knew and understood from the dream that even though he's the king now, he's the head of many nations, God has a plan for him in his life. Look at verse 36. It said, there was a dream. Now for its meaning, your Majesty, you are a king over many kings. For the God of heaven has given you your kingdom. He has given you your power. He has given you your strength. And he has given you your glory. When you walk down the street and people bow down because the king is coming, he said, he said, in the dream, God is letting you know the power that you have, I have given it to you. The authority that you have, it came from God. And then in verse 37, your Majesty, you are the king over many kings, but God has given, for the God of heaven has given you your kingdom, your power, your strength, your glory. You rule the Father's providence. In other words, You got so much territory that you can't even travel in a day's time, probably not even in a month's time, throughout the providence that you have, that God had increased your territory. You are one of the richest of all kings. Power, strength, glory. You rule as far as prince. You rule the farthest providence, and even animals and birds are under your control. As God decreed, you are that head of gold. In other words, that God had made you. In that dream which you've seen, God is letting you know he had made you head over everything in your providence. Verse 39. But after your kingdom has come to an end, another world power will arise and take your place. Can I put a pin here today? Because we have seen kings rise and kings fall. We have seen presidents and leaders of country come on the throne, and they're there only for a while. And before we know it, that leader is no longer the leader anymore. It's somebody else is coming in their stead. And God was letting him know in the dream, but that your time is short. And you got to make sure you better be getting right with God. You better be getting right with your life, because he's letting them know that your time is short. Look at verse 38 again. You rule the farthest providence, and even animals and birds are under your control. As God decreed, you are that head of gold. You're the head of these many nations. Verse 39, but after your kingdom has come to an end, another world power will arise and take your place. Looking at the news the last few weeks, all the world powers are coming to the scene. Which nation are the greatest? Which nation is more powerful? Which nation have the ability to control the rest of the world? Look at verse 39 again. This empire will be inferior to your, let me go back. But after your kingdom has come to an end, another world power will arise and take your place. The emperor or the empire will be inferior to yours. And after that king has fallen, yet a third power will come. Another king will come, represented by the bronze belly of the statue. And Daniel is breaking down the dream of what Nebuchadnezzar seen in his dream. He's seen this stature, and he's seen it from the head to the toe. And every part of that stature, it lets Daniel and let the people know that there's a time that's taking place in this statue. What they see from the head to the breastplate, from the legs all the way down to the feet, it's different leaders. It's going to happen in different times that is going to come to pass. Verse 40, it says that following it, the fourth kingdom will be strong as iron, smashing, bruising, and conquering. The fourth kingdom is going to be a mighty nation, and they're going to be ruling over other nations. Smashing and bruising. There's gonna be some fighting. Gonna be some bad stuff that is gonna be going on here during this time. And it goes on down in verse 41, 42. The feet and the toes you saw, part iron and part clay, show that later on this kingdom will be divided. Some parts of it will be as strong as iron, and some as weak as clay. Some nations is going to be strong as iron. Some nations is going to be weak as clay. We know that clay is nothing but dirt and dust. Verse 43, this mixture of iron with clay also shows that these kingdoms would try to strengthen themselves. Instead of trying to do it by being obedient to God, they're going to try to strengthen themselves by themselves, trusting in themselves. And we can look around the world and just see what's going on around the world right now. That many these nations that do not serve God, do not choose God as their El Shaddai, the Almighty. They have come, they have fallen, they have come back again, and some of them are in great power right now. But then when I went down to verse 43, let me read that again. The mixture of iron with clay also shows that these kingdoms would try to strengthen themselves by forming alliance with each other. Haven't you been hearing on the news where people, nations are forming alliance with each other right now, trying to become a global power? They're too small to do it by themselves, but if they figure they can get this person and that nation online with them, then they can become a world power. By forming an alliance with each other through intermarriage of their rulers, but this will not succeed. That's what my Bible says. For iron and clay don't mix. Just because people or nations are coming together, don't mean that they're going to agree on everything. And sooner or later, iron and clay ain't going to mix. Iron going to be clay, and clay going to be, iron is going to be iron, and clay is going to be clay. Go down to verse 44, if you will. It says, during the reign of those kings, the God of heaven would set up a kingdom that would never be destroyed. During the rule of all of those heathen nations and those unruly and unjust kings that is in power, God is letting them know that it's only going to last for a short time and those nations will be destroyed. Verse 44. During the reign of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. No one will ever conquer it. It will shatter all these kingdoms unto nothingness. But it shall stand before indestructible. That is meaning that the rock cut from the mountain with a human hand, the rock that crushed the powder, all the iron and the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold. Thus the great God has shown what will happen in the future. In other words, God said when they have become, they think a great power. God gonna do some crushing down. He's the one. He's gonna show them. He'll let them go for a while, and nations fighting against nations, and world ruler fighting against world ruler, and trying to become the greatest power. But God said, I'm gonna let you know that that ain't but one great power, and that's me myself. The El Shaddai, the Almighty God. I went on down, if you will, and we got to rush on tonight. I won't get into all of this, but if you will, look at verse 48 in chapter 2. It said, then the king made Daniel a great man and gave many great gifts and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon. Now, after Daniel gave him the interpretation thereof, the king was so happy that he understood the dream that he elevated Daniel. Now, Daniel is a slave, but Daniel no longer now is going to be a slave. Daniel is being elevated to the ruler over the king's kingdom. And I gotta put a pin here tonight because Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they stayed faithful unto God, and they did not bow themselves down before the golden image, in which we spend to see here in verse chapter 3. But they stayed faithful to God, and in their faithfulness to God, no matter how bad the situation was where they were, in their faithfulness to God, God continued to elevate them in the midst of opposition. I went down to verse 48 again. Then the king made Daniel a great man and gave him many great gifts and made him ruler over the whole. I underlined that in my Bible. Made him the ruler of the whole province of Babylon and the chief of governors over all the wise men of Babylon. Then Daniel requested of the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. because Daniel had power and favor, had power through God and favor with Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel not only was elevated himself, but because of Daniel's faith in what he did and the interpretation thereof, Daniel said, look, I got some friends that with me, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, and they were elevated as well. Verse 49, then Daniel requested of the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel sat in the gate of the king. Now these other friends of Daniel, they had authority, but Daniel sat in the gate of the king. In other words, Daniel was the second power of all the kingdom of Nebuchadnezzar. He was the number two man in Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. Can I say this tonight? Even though Daniel did not bow down to Nebuchadnezzar, look at the elevation that God elevated Daniel through all the ranks of Nebuchadnezzar's astrologers and all of them who were supposed to be very smart men, his wise men. Now Daniel's sitting at the top of the building. It went down to verse chapter 3, if you will. And we know that Nebuchadnezzar here is getting ready to erect a statue, an image. And Nebuchadnezzar the king, in verse 1, Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits. He was 90 feet tall. And his breadth thereof was 6 cubits, of 6 feet wide. He set up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Verse 2, then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent to gather together the province, the governors, the captains, the judges. Now he's sending for all the people throughout the land and the other countries that he was over. And he's bringing them to where he is because Nebuchadnezzar had erected a golden image. And he was going to tell them, look, y'all going to have to bow down to this image. This image is going to represent the kingdom of Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 2, then Nebuchadnezzar, in chapter 3, then Nebuchadnezzar, the king, sent to gather together the princes and the governors and the captains and the judges and the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, all the rulers of the province to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar had set up. He wanted everybody to see this image that he had set up. And then for them to bow down and to worship what he had set up. But look at verse 3. And then the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the province were gathered together unto the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And then in verse 4, here will trouble come. Then a herald cry aloud. To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, everybody that is here, that at what time you hear the sound of the cornet, the flute, the harp, the sackbut, the psalter, the dove clamor, and all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the golden image which Nebuchadnezzar has set up. He said, everybody that is here, when they crank the music up, everybody's supposed to bow down and worship this golden image made by the hands of man that Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Verse 6, and whoso falleth not down and worship shall be the same hour be cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Therefore, at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, when they heard the music playing, the Bible said here they fell down and they worshiped the golden image. Now, these are people from many different nations come across the water over to what Nebuchadnezzar had called them from or called them to. And they fell down and worshiped the idol, the image made by the hands of man. Go down to verse 8, if you will. We're trying to round this out tonight. Let me see what time it is real quick. Okay, if you will give me about 4 more minutes, and we'll try to round it out tonight. But this is so important because we can look at in today's world what is going on. Men, women, nations fighting for world power, fighting to be the head, to be the leader of the whole world. And in verse 8 it said, wherefore at that time, certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. They spake and said unto the king of Nebuchadnezzar, live forever. Thou, O king, hast thou not made a decree that every man that hear the sound of the music should bow down and worship your golden image? Now here they are, they send some folk in the crowd that did not bow down to serve this idol God. And then so they come to the king and say, King, look, we were peeping out over the crowd, and we seen some folk out there that wasn't bowing. King said, oh yeah, who was it that was bold enough not to bow down to my image? Look at verse 11 here. And whosoever falleth not down and worship, that should be cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews among us has set over the affairs of the province of Babylon. He said, now there's certain folk that you elevated. And you know they worship the El Shaddai, the Almighty God. And you set them over your province and over your people. They are the ones, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that did not bow down to worship your idol God. Verse 12, it said, there are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thou, little God, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. King was furious after that. Look at verse 13. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage, in fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these three men before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Is it true that y'all did not bow down to my image? Don't you know I'm the king? And y'all are supposed to bow down when I tell you to bow down. But then look at verse 15. Now, if ye be ready, he said, I'm going to give you another chance to bow down and worship my image. Verse 15. Now, if ye be ready, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, the flute, the harp, the sackbut, and all the other music, I want you to fall down and worship the image which I have made. Well, but if ye worship not, ye shall be cast the same hour into the midst of the fiery furnace. King giving them a chance. He threatening them as to what he's going to do to them. King is on in a spot now because he elevated these Hebrew boys, these people who trusted in God. He elevated them to be over his people and over his province. Now the king is in the spot. He said, come on now, boys, y'all gonna bow down to my image because see, you making my image look bad. But then when I went down to verse 16, verse 15, it said, now if ye be ready at the time that you hear the cornet, at the time that you hear the music, and all kinds of music, fall down and worship the golden image which I have made. Well, but if ye worship not, ye shall be cast at the same hour into the fiery furnace. And who is that God? Now, this is the part I was trying to get to tonight. He asking them, the God that gave Daniel the interpretation, who is that God shall deliver you out of my hand? God already had sent him a godly man that would not eat the food from the king's table. It took a stand and said, we're not going to eat this meat because this is not good for us. And here he is now, is threatening them, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. In verse 16, answered and said to the king, O King Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. In other words, we have no need to answer you in this matter. Matter of fact, we're going to hold our peace. We ain't going to say nothing, but not only are we not going to say anything, we're not going to bow down either. Verse 17, if it be so, our God whom we serve is able. Can we put a pin on that tonight? I know my time is running. But in the midst of opposition, in the midst of trial, here they are. Now they in the heat of the battle. And here they are taking a stand. So even if God don't do it, we know that he's able. Verse 17, if it be so, our God in whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will. I got stuck on he will. I underlined that in my Bible. And he will deliver us out of thy hands, O king. See, in other words, now here they are at the point of battle that they normally a person would break and say, because they know they're finna get ready to be killed, they go ahead and say, okay, I go ahead and bow down. I go ahead and worship your God. But here they are. They standing all the way to the end and say, if you take our life, it's all right with us because we're not going to serve or bow down to any other God. Verse 18, but if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will, verse 17, I'm sorry, y'all. I'm trying to get to 18. Verse 17, if it be so, our God in whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning furnace, and he will deliver us out of thy hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee. But if not, if God don't deliver me, I'm still going to keep my conviction that we will not serve thou gods nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. If God don't deliver us out of the fiery furnace, we still going to worship him in the furnace. Verse 19, then King Nebuchadnezzar, full of fury, excuse me, y'all, full of fury in the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Long as they were doing what Nebuchadnezzar had asked them to do, they was his buddies. But now when they take a stand when it comes to their God, now he's mad at them now. And his vestige changed. In other words, his attitude changed. He's talking ugly to the boys now. They was his friends a while ago, but now he's talking bad to them. He commanded that they should heat up the fiery furnace 7 times hotter than it had already been. He said, I tell you what, I'm going to show them something. Heat it up. It's hot already, but I want you to heat it up 7 times 7. Make it hotter than it's ever been before. In verse 20, and he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their hoses, in other words, their socks. Look how they threw them in. They threw them in with all their clothes on, their socks, their hats, and their garments, and were cast into the midst of the fiery furnace. Thank you, Lord. Verse 22. Therefore, because the king commandment was urgent, and the furnace is exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire slew the men, took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, they didn't turn something up on God's people, turned the furnace up. And the furnace that they meant for God's people, they burned themselves up. You ever seen anybody like that, look, trying to do something to God's people, and they end up hurting themselves? And the fire that they turned up for God's men was the same fire that burnt them up and consumed them. Somebody ought to shout hallelujah tonight. That your enemy has no power on how or who or when you serve your God. I went down to verse 23 and it said, and these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Verse 24, when they fell down in the midst of the fiery furnace, then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished and rose up in haste. In other words, when he seen Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, he got up out of his seat in a hurry because he seen something happening that he didn't expect to happen. The Bible said here in verse 24, I know we're over, but just give me 2 more minutes. The Bible said here in verse 24, said, then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished and rose up in haste and spake and said unto his counselor, did not we cast in 3 bound in the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, that's right, king, we cast in 3. But the king says, something going on here now. I know we cast in 3, but I'm seeing more than 3. And then when he got down to verse 25, he answered and said, lo, I see 4 men that we cast into the fiery furnace. We bound 3 men and we cast them in. But now I see 4 men in the fiery furnace and they're not bound anymore. As a matter of fact, he said they are loose. Verse 24, Nebuchadnezzar, king, was astonished and rose up in haste and spake and said unto the council, did we not cast in 3 men bound in the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, true, O king. He answered and said, lo, I see 4 loose walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt. But not only do I see them walking, not only do I see them where we intended to hurt them, that they're not hurt, but then we see not only 3, but we see 4. And then the 4th one, he said, and this is the king, they have no hurt in the form of the 4 look like the Son of God. In other words, God allowed him to see the king who was over all of these provinces, over all of these countries. He allowed them to see him as a deliverer unto his people. He had oppressed the people. He had enslaved them. He had did everything that he wanted to do to God's people. And God showed him in the midst of what he was trying to do, that God came in and delivered them out of the fiery furnace. But not only did he deliver them out of the fire, he delivered them in the fire. Because the Bible said that they was in there. They was walking around. And what I want to just say tonight as we go off the air, you may be in a situation right now where you feel like somebody to have you bound while you yet trying to worship, you're trying to praise God, you're trying to live righteous for God. And here it is every day, a day in, a day out, month in, a month out, year in, a year out. Somebody's always working against you, always trying to hold you down, always trying to hurt you and get you to quit worshiping God, to quit following God, quit talking about your God. But you've been holding on and still talking about your God in the midst of your circumstance. God is telling you to hold on, because he's not only a deliverer, but he'll get in the fire with you. And he'll let those who are your oppressors see that God is a God, not only a God that would deliver, but he'll come down and get in there with you and make you free in the midst of your situation. The Bible says they were walking around free in their situation. And they didn't even get any smoke on them. Neither were their clothes charged. Won't God do it? And when you come out of what you're going through, you'll be just like pure gold. When you know that God ain't no shorter than his word, and you wait on him all the way up to the last minute, to the last second, and then you go beyond when time done ran out, and you still got your hand in the master's hand. You're still holding on to what God said, and folks talking about you, telling you ought to let that go. You ought to put that Bible down. You ought to leave God's words alone. Don't you see your situation around you? Don't you, have you looked at yourself and seen how bad you look right now? Have you looked at yourself and seen your situation? And then you can smile and say, yes, I've seen it. But I also seen the glory of God. And I know, and I'm waiting on God, because I know my God is a deliverer. That's the attitude that God wants us to have. That's why this story is in the Bible, for us to see, to know, and to understand. If we wait on God and trust God, to know that God will and God can. We're going to close out tonight. I'm sorry I went over a little bit tonight, but I didn't want to leave this part of the story out, to try to come back to it next week, because it's so important that we know the story. as is told, and how God moved in every part of these young men's life and delivered them from this furnace. We're going to still stick with this on next week. We're coming back to it because there's a whole lot left that we have not talked about. There's some other things that happened after this incident that we need to know about. So we're going to keep trusting God. We ask that you go back and continue to read and to study and to look at this text, because it will be meat to your bones and marrow, strength to your spiritual body. So we thank God tonight. We ask that you will come on and turn your mics back on. And y'all excuse me for going over again tonight. It's just one of those nights that I just feel the spirit moving in somebody's life tonight that's online, that's studying this lesson. You count it as joy to know and continue to wait on God. And God will and God can. Come on, let's turn our mics on and say our hellos tonight.